I don't know.
Say it with me. I don't know.
Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 122 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Dr. Bob and I interview a man who we'll call Casey to protect his true identity and so that he can be more candid in telling his story. Casey kept a dark secret from age 10 to 30, and today, at age 38, he shares it publicly for the first time. The deconstruction of his Christian faith happened relatively quickly, in less than a year, but not until he was 36. He's surrounded by believers, including his wife, parents, siblings, but he does a good job of keeping the peace and maintaining those relationships. Casey's story brings up a touchy subject, victimhood, and how to handle it. Many people are reluctant to call themselves a victim, out of disdain for being aligned with those who seem to capitalize or gain some much-needed attention from dwelling on it or wallowing in it. Sometimes victims are offended when they're unfairly accused of this. I made this mistake on episode 6 of this podcast when I accused a dear lifelong friend named Sam of playing that card. He hasn't spoke to me since, and won't, and he lives right here in Nashville. In this age of political correctness and the strong arguments on both sides of that issue, there is much for us to learn on this nuanced subject. One side is trying to enlighten people too privileged to understand how words can hurt someone traumatized by decades or even generations of abuse and discrimination. The other side is trying to protect First Amendment rights to say what you want and let societies toughen up. As a vocal, opinionated person, I have said hundreds of times to people offended by my words, if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. But the question remains, who made me the shoe cobbler of other people's feet? I find myself agreeing and disagreeing with both sides of this quandary, and here we find ourselves. Casey took the tough guy route and suppressed his victimhood for 2 decades, but found that no matter how hard he suppressed it, it was determined to resurface and demand a reckoning. Casey models how, as humans, we are fragile and vulnerable, and yet strong and resilient. This should come as no epiphany. After all, we all, literally all, are fighting our own battles. And it is never the place for anyone, stranger or friend, to give unsolicited critique of how that person is working through their own unique circumstance. So in case you're listening, Sam, I apologize for my callous, presumptuous accusations, and although you are in no way obligated to restore our friendship or even forgive me, I confess that I would like that whenever you're ready. Ooh, did you catch that? Whenever you're ready implies a weakness on his part. There I go again. Like I said, this shit is nuanced. That said, Sam, I hope that you can see my heart and know my intent, and separate my inept choice of words from my actual character and core, knowing that Sam could say, "Oh, I see your character, and you are not capable of empathy, and thus not safe to be around." And that would be his prerogative, of course. In the area of friendships, Casey has a great success, maintaining lifelong friendships and making new ones in the present. As a tip, he offers a practice that reminds me of Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn. This sounds like common sense, and it is, but I appreciate Casey's emphasis on it. And that is that a true friend is able to celebrate other people's successes and not be jealous or envious, but be truly happy for them. Some of what we gleaned from Scripture when we were Christians turned out to be common sense, good advice, and, unlike much of Scripture, relevant today. This is part of what drew us to Christianity in the first place. Perhaps we mistook it as the sole source of morality for humanity back then, but for those of us unanchored to insisting that it's God's Word, we can retain some of what we learned and be the better for it. So today I'm introducing a new segment of the show that will feature every now and then, not every week, but I'm a huge proponent of talk therapy for everyone, for the world, and I love to think about why we do what we do as humans. So I have a few friends who are psychologists or therapists, and I've asked them to give their 2 cents every now and then regarding the things that come up on a particular episode, or just something interesting or relevant in the culture. So after Bob and I do our post-interview commentary, I've tacked on a 15-minute conversation with Dr. Brenda Quinn, a former guest of the show, episode 77, and we discussed things that came up during Casey's interview. We taped this conversation on October 8th, 2016. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast, give it 5 stars, and or leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps. Our show is available on most podcast platforms. Also, you can support us monetarily in many ways. You can pledge $1 per episode or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. We also have an Indiegogo fundraiser going to raise money to upgrade our equipment. A link to that is in the show notes. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode is by Sam Mayer, recorded on a handpan in the New York City subway. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. So, Casey, I know that you reached out to me, I think, or we corresponded through texting and Facebook and email.
Yep. Yeah, I originally reached out to you just to kind of get some of your input on how you handle the transition from going more with your family, because I share, I think, some similarities. And, I'm married with 3 children, and I'm probably at a stage where you were several years ago when your kids were a little bit younger, and I never expected that you'd be able to, you'd be so generous with your time. So I really appreciated that. That meant a lot.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. So how old are you?
I am 38 years old.
And when did you ever serve in ministry? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, well, it's kind of unique. I spent, my life very entrenched in the church world. I have a lot of my family members, my dad, brother-in-law are in very influential roles in mega churches. And so I spent a lot of my life more in volunteer roles, but about 3 years ago, me and my family relocated to Michigan. And when we came here, the church that we started going to, it was smaller than we had typically gone to. And it seemed like they very quickly identified, who I was connected with, and they seem to identify the people that are more generous with their tithes. So I think within the first couple of weeks, they identified who I was and seemed to kind of really seek us out to connect with us. And I look back at it now, and I think that may have been more their motivations for why they sought us out.
We got a live one here. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, they were very kind to us to begin with, But so as soon as we got here, the pastor there, who was similar age of mine, and so he asked me to go to breakfast and was kind of picking my brain quite a bit. And so very early on, they asked me to lead one of their what they call missional communities, which is essentially, or it's kind of like a house church.
Yeah.
And then but the goal is if it gains enough momentum that it would be a church plant.
Right. And what year would that be?
So that was in 2014.
Okay, recent. Wow, yeah.
Wow.
Yep. So this is all fairly recent. I moved fairly quickly in my transition. Once I get a little bit of information, like I just go all in, and I over the course of a year probably I spent 15 to 20 hours a week just reading books and listening to YouTube videos and podcasts, and it was a pretty swift transition.
Where have you landed now? I mean, how do you identify?
So right now, I mean, I don't tend to use the word atheist often in many circles because, I just don't have too many people in my life that would even recognize, I think, really, or understand what that means. But I would say I'm, definitely an atheist. And, I don't know what's going to happen when I die, but I'm 99% sure that it's all over. It's going to be the same thing it was from before I was born,
I say it over and over again about the show's name and everything, but when it comes to the gods that humans have identified, we say no. We don't believe in that God. So we're atheist about all man-made gods, which I think is actually really noble. Yeah. In fact, the most Christian thing I ever did was leave Christianity. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing is if you love God and you love the thought of God and you hope there's a God, but yet you know that its very existence is so ineffable, so unknowable, so unexplainable, unfathomable, that when it comes to God and the character of God or the nature of God, no one knows. So the best way to honor the office of God is just shut the fuck up. Because as soon as a human being opens their mouth to describe or define God, they defile God, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's heresy, in my opinion.
Sure.
So all religions are heresy to my atheism, which is my practice of theism.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think what I realized for myself as I've done just a lot of introspection of myself, I realized how vulnerable I have always been to being easily persuaded by very convincing orators, or people that it's like if they can say something really convincingly, I was like, yep, I believe what that guy just said. And I clearly know now that isn't an effective way to go about life. But until you really acknowledge that about yourself, it's something that I think is kind of how the church continues to thrive today.
Absolutely.
Sure.
When I really went on my search and started reading Sam Harris and Bart Ehrman, Dan Barker, Richard Carey, I mean all the great people that I think have contributed to a lot of people deconverting from Christianity, is that they were all very transparent in backing up their information and citing their sources, and that all has made a tremendous impact on me just in general and how I go about life on a daily basis. I'm far less naive.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think the default of all humans is, as children, is authoritarianism. I mean, that's where we start out.
Sure.
We just take what people tell us, and we're concrete thinkers, and so we start there. That's the default. And the muscle, the skeptical muscle, the cynical or the scientific inquiring and questioning and requiring evidence, those muscles are developed later. And so this is no wonder that churches grab you while you're young, and you're credulous by default. But you developed those skeptical skills. And
Casey, if you changed so quickly, you said like it took about a year, whereas it would take somebody else maybe 5 years or 10 years.
Took me 5 years, yeah.
Yeah, because you're all in, man.
Aggressive.
You go all in and you want to find out. Do you think that means that you could easily then be persuaded back?
I can't even imagine a scenario in which that would be possible. And the year time frame, I mean, that I said, I'll be honest, the where I went from calling myself a Christian to calling myself not a Christian happened probably even quicker than that. But I spent a solid year after I kind of came to that place, before I was really outspoken about it, I was like, I want to more than just feel what I feel. I want to be able to back it up with information. So when I did come out to my family and friends, that for me, I wanted to be able to talk knowledgeably about the topic. But two topics that kind of pulled me out most was obviously the concept of hell. And once I researched the historicity of hell and how that's been manipulated over the years, and then the historicity of tithing and how that's been manipulated. I was a very generous giver over the years, and I did it with a giving heart, and I can't tell you how fucking pissed off I get now. And I think,
what you could be doing with that money.
Yeah.
It's not even if I didn't have it myself, the real good I could have done with it. You know what I mean? Like that. At the end of the day, I've been fortunate to have a successful career and be able to provide comfortably for my family. And it's not even that I want that $125,000 back. It's that I would love to know that it could have been used for something that actually is going to change people's life for the better. And I have to look back and know that it all it did was contribute to some big new building that was built where more people can be, bamboozled into believing this bullshit.
Well, just a second. $125,000 is what you gave over the course of a year?
No, it was over the course of about 10 years. I wasn't throwing it out that quickly, but it was still when me and my wife first got married, that was something we committed. That was one of the first things early on in our marriage. We said we're going to tithe consistently, and we every payday we tithed, and we did it with what we thought was a giving heart and being disciplined in what we were, what God, and what I know now is what the church has told us to do.
Well, whatever's there, they're going to take it and run. I mean, they're going to.
Yep, they do. And it's again, it's another one of those things that it's by no accident. It's all very well strategized and how they convince people to essentially hand over their hard-earned money for, and I can tell you these churches, there's no accountability in their expenses and how they spend their money. They're paying for spouses, cell phone bills, and all they act really generous with their staff, but what they're doing is they're just giving away this money carelessly that's been so generously given to them, and it's certainly not being used for the mission that they claim that it's being used on a majority level.
Well, one of the mechanisms there is that the pastors have convinced the people that they're giving it to God, which in a way, as long as that person thinks they're giving it to God and not to humans, then it kind of protects the humans from any accountability as to what the hell they do with it. It's just a built-in thing. The other thing that's built in that I think is indicative or at least evidence of the nature of church and the very few scriptures there are in the entire Bible regarding tithing, the church has just taken those and put them in big, bold print and preached about them over and over again. And it's interesting that they select which scriptures to emphasize and which ones to de-emphasize. So we're drawn to the scriptures that support what we already believe, confirmation bias, which in a way, the whole religion is the invention of a man, of humans, that they projected onto God what they hoped would be true. In fact, the Hebrews 11 definition of faith is so revealing. Think about this. Faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all you have to do is I hope or wish that God was X, and therefore my faith makes him that. So literally faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
It's perfect.
So which came first, the horse or the cart or the chicken or the egg or whatever? It's literally faith is admitting that this is our wishful thinking manifested in a religion.
Yeah.
And so no wonder that when we get to the scriptures that appeal more to our likes and interests that we highlight those. I mean, it's just evident.
This is something you guys will both, I think, be interested in. This past week, I went to a place called Skyway Studios. It used to be in Nashville. It used to be owned by PTL, by Pat Robertson.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it started out as an old Sam's Club, and they turned it into this giant studio production facility with uplinks and everything. I mean, it's amazing. It's outstanding. It's a beautiful place in terms of the facility. Around the corner, the guy is showing us, taking us around and showing us the studios. He says, I want to show you one more thing. And he takes us into this giant room. I mean, a huge place with probably 100 or more carols in it. And
a carol is a desk.
Yeah, like a desk with
cubicle.
Cubicle, right. 100 or more. And he said this was where Pat Robertson raised all his money, right in here.
Yeah, the call center.
The call center, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's still there, and they don't know what to do with it except maybe rent it out for a call center. But this is where he made hundreds of millions of dollars off people. And give me that big-time religion, man. Isn't that something?
I didn't realize he had any roots in Nashville.
No, gone now. I mean, now this place is completely secular and taken over by other people. But man, I just sat there with my mouth open. I mean, it was massive, like a football field. It was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the greed that's at the center, sometimes I'll have some family or friends be like, well, you seem really angry about it. And it's like, truthfully, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my whole life. Mm-hmm. But if you wanted me to get angry, or you want me to talk about things that anger me, it's talking about the predatory practices of the church. And it, so often it's the televangelists and stuff like that gets the bad rap. But to me, it's any of these mega churches or any of them that preach the
prosperity gospel and stuff?
The prosperity gospel, that's a given. Everyone pretty much can recognize how horrible
Corrupt
that is. But I think it's more the predatory efforts of where the church goes after people's heart before they go after their pocketbook, and they lure them in with the illusion of comfort and community and protection. And it's all with the understanding that once they get them in there and they become part of the tribe, now it's, well, everyone's got to give back to God what's already his. That's what's so predatory about it to me. It's that they do it under the guise of trying to heal the brokenhearted and don't get me wrong, I do think there are genuine people out there that have that intention.
Oh, absolutely.
But at the end of the day, I think each one of those hearts has a dollar sign in the middle of it.
Well, and let's be clear that one of the ways that the church does that is that it is, like you say, cloaked in helping people. And that's genuine. I love this phrase that in order, good people will always do good things, bad people will always do bad things. But in order to get good people to do bad things, it requires religion. And one of the ways that works is that this notion of, like what we're referring to sounds rather malicious, as far as this notion of stealing from people or bait and switch or manipulation and deception. The way that good people end up doing that, and they really are good people, is that it's just piled and stacked and cloaked in benevolence and generosity and kindness and making the world a better place. Everything that good church people think they're doing. So I do think that it's not fair necessarily for us to sit here and say the church is full of malicious people. They're there, but they're everywhere.
Yeah.
But I'm saying there's a lot going on done by people that to this day are good and have no conscience about the evils that they're doing because it's piled high with all this niceties and such.
And one of the things Casey said was, this church provides this benevolence, this protection. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute.
Protection that sounds mafia, doesn't it?
Yeah, what protection from what? What are you protecting people from?
I don't know. What do you think?
Right.
Yeah, what do you think, Case? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think, they present it as protection from the evils of this world, protection from anything that could potentially make them feel vulnerable. That's where they seem to like to swoop in, and they generate their greatest growth when they catch people at their most vulnerable states in life, when they're going through a divorce or when they've been victimized in other ways. And that's where, I see so many parallels in when you think, and I know some people may not like this parallel, but similar to a sexual predator, everyone thinks it's the guy with the trench coat looming in the corner. Well, that's not the guy who preys on people. It's the guy who is the family friend or someone else that builds trust and gets them in a vulnerable state, and then they're able to prey on them. And I don't think that every pastor is out there with that intention. But I do think that predatory approach of getting people to drop their guard and to catch them at their weakest moments or at their most desperate moments. And that's where the times when I turned to the church was when I was hurting the most. You know what I mean? And that's how we started going to church initially, was when, my parents went through a divorce my dad was like devastated. And next thing you know, we were going to church because that was what helped him get through, get through the divorce.
We're sinking, and we need a lifeline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. For the most part, that's typically the strategy that the church takes. And again, I don't want to misrepresent everybody's intentions. And I mean, I know the family members I have that are in ministry are very loving and good people, but I think there's time when they're aware of what they're doing too. I mean, I think that there's no confusion that they intentionally leave out very important content that's in the scriptures that they don't make it a point to ever discuss on Sunday morning or ever Bible studies and whatnot. So,
well, like you said, you read the Bible, and that's what led to your atheism. Well, they're reading the same Bible, but guess what? Rose-colored glasses, filters.
Yeah.
Yep.
And here's the thing: is we're going to do two things with Christians. We're either going to say you're malicious and you're evil and you're doing this on purpose, or you're duped. And see, a lot of people, when we say to Christians, you're duped, you're deluded, you're self-deluded, you're in a la-la land, then they see that as an insult. But if what they don't realize is that if we don't say that, then our next evaluation is, oh, you mean you know what you're doing?
Right?
Oh, that makes you even worse a monster.
Yeah.
So you're lucky we're calling you duped.
Yep. No, that's probably the most generous thing we could say to them.
Exactly.
And I will say, I mean, the transition that the church has made over the last 30 years, when the mega church boom, I mean, it's really paralleled the booms of the economy and big business. I mean, it's a very common trend for these churches to hire retired CEOs and CFOs. I know that's the church that I was connected with, the mega church from my hometown. They brought in a retired CFO that ran a Fortune 500 company to operate the business side of the church. Mm-hmm. And they use the same culture of branding, and the little church of 30 to 50 people that used to kind of be that's what church was 50 years ago. The little guys are getting weeded out. Those small churches aren't, and those are the ones that I'd say are probably more often the most genuine, that are living a humble life, that are more parallel to, what you would expect. And so, if there's anything that makes me angry, it's seeing the greed and the money that's been filtered through the mega church.
Right. Casey, when you moved from wherever you moved from to Michigan, did you jump into a mega church there as well? You left a mega church and got to, or was it a more mainstream kind of thing? Yeah.
So when we got here, the church that we ended up connecting with was quite a bit smaller. I mean, smaller relative to us. It's about a 500 member church. We came from what was about a 12,000 member church.
Boy. So
in our world, it was quite a bit smaller, but it's all relative, I guess, to what people have experienced.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. We're 30 minutes in, and we're just now starting your backstory. So talk about your childhood. Where were you born and raised?
Yeah, so I was initially born in Iowa, but I moved at a young age to Illinois. I was about 5 years old when we moved there. So
siblings?
I have one biological brother, and then later, and I guess I get to this later in the story, I also have two stepbrothers and a stepsister as well.
Mm-hmm. Were your parents religious?
My dad and my mom always identified as Christian. We weren't big church goers, but I will say that I remember going to church when I was 5 years old, and that was my my really only early experience in church until we started going again after my parents got divorced when I was 11. But that stood out to me, and I mean, from that day on, I still always remember praying when I did something wrong, or if I pissed off my parents, or if I swore, or if whatever a 7-year-old does that he shouldn't do. I mean, it established an instinct in me to want to ask for forgiveness to some mysterious person.
You were conscious of the thought police.
When my parents got divorced when I was about 11, that was when my dad, me and my brother stayed living with my dad, and he quickly got us connected with a church. And then he very shortly after my parents' divorce connected with my stepmom, who it actually happened to be one of my best friends, who's now my stepbrother. his mom, but she worked at a very influential evangelical church in Wheaton, Illinois, and she worked there for quite some time, really up until just a few years ago. So we were entrenched in that evangelical world pretty quickly. Like there was once my dad and her got married, our life changed dramatically. I mean, it was, and that was the same church that I still continued to go to when we left. So when I started there, it was like 100 members, and by the time we left, it was a 12,000 person mega church.
Wow! So her influence on by the time you were 11, your dad was getting religious. She was influencing the thing. But my question is, did you personally? What's your personal journey with Jesus? I mean, did you ever really take it on full? Because up to this point, it sounds rather superficial.
So going through like about the end of junior high is when there was a church camp, and I went to one with the youth group there, and that was like my first one of the first of many times where I accepted Jesus. And then later in life there was always those re-accept Jesus or re-say the sinner's prayer, but so it was first in like 8th grade, and then throughout high school I got actively involved in the youth groups at that church. But actually for 3 years in high school, I started going to, and this is where my faith got a little weird, or the weirdest. I started going to Assemblies of God church with some friends of mine, and that experience really tainted my feelings on church in general, and just the creepy nature of it all. There was a lot of the speaking in tongues, and I mean things that I know you're familiar with as far as the Pentecostal movement. The
laying on of hands and people prophesying, and
Yep. I mean, that was where I had my most, I guess, real interactions with God. As far as I was
emotions.
I mean, the emotions were real, and there was lots of hour-long prayer sessions at the altar with tears streaming down our face, and I went through a period of time where I spoke in tongues, and I know now, or I knew then too, that that I was essentially following everyone's lead. It was like, all right, everybody else is doing this, so I should have bought a Hyundai, but I didn't, and that did the same thing that everybody else did. But I never felt like it was an out-of-body experience that that some people describe.
No, it's a fake it till you make it, but you just never make it.
Yeah.
It
sounds so, I don't know, it sounds like childlike. It sounds like your children, rather than, like even this notion of protection and all that stuff. I mean, come on. But I guess that's that suffer the little children, don't think about it, those kind of things.
Well, God is the giant paternal figure. I mean, religious people need a daddy.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So the fact that it not only appeals to your childlikeness or childishness, but it perpetuates it because it keeps you in a state of immaturity. And my experience with most of what
that's what it sounds like. It's like, well, come on, just use your agency, like you say. Where's your
There's
agency?
No agency.
Put your big boy pants on. Those
agency
kind of
is evil almost, because it would be you thinking for yourself or you taking up.
Oh, I see.
There's a lot of bumper stickers over the years of Jesus is my pilot, or Jesus is my co-pilot, or some of these billboards these days say I am second. You ever seen that movement?
No.
Well, God is first,
Okay.
And John the Baptist said in his prison cell, I become less and he becomes more, and this is the goal of Christianity, is for you to disappear and for Jesus to appear. Like the more manifest you are of God's nature and less of your agency and autonomy and uniqueness and characteristics,
Yep. No. So that really, that experience in that Assemblies of God church, definitely, that was probably the times where I'd say I was most committed in my faith, or where the experience was most real and most manipulative at the same time, if that makes any sense.
Did you go to Wheaton College?
No, I did not go to Wheaton College. I went to another Christian college nearby called Judson College. So that's where I was actually good friends with Kyle Strobel my freshman year in college. So I got to see.
This is Lee Strobel's son.
Yeah. Yep. So and we're still. We talk periodically, more Facebook friends than anything. I wouldn't.
Does he endorse his father? The stuff that his dad
Oh
said?
yeah.
Oh,
He's no, he's drank the Kool-Aid all along, and
He's kind of taken up that mantle, hasn't he? Like he's become an apologist himself, right?
yeah, but he does more historical writings on it, and I'm going to draw a blank on the name of the person that he primarily writes about. But he's more, I think he's more on a historical level that he writes about. He hasn't necessarily taken up the same like apologetic case for Christ, case for faith type approaches.
Mm-hmm. So what degree did you end up getting? Was it?
Yeah, I didn't end up finishing. I did end up coming back home, of course, chasing a girl. That's the demise of all of us, right? No, but went back home to go to community college, and then, of course, right when we got back there, we broke up, and that was fine. But I was very fortunate early on. I got involved in working in real estate investment and have really had a very fortunate career path in this industry, and now help run a fairly large real estate investment company in the Midwest here that is been very successful. So
your current wife, where did you meet her?
So, we met like every good Christian meets at a local sports bar. And this was at a stage in life where I would say I was backsliding, which was a large portion of my adult life. We did have some mutual friends though, and so I knew a coworker of hers that she was with at a local bar that sponsored a softball team that we all went to. So we went to that bar, and I met her, and we knew pretty quickly that, or at least I knew pretty quickly, she wasn't as equally as smitten right away as I was. But we got married, though, within 5 months from our first date. So it was a pretty quick courting process. And then if we can do the math, my oldest son was born about 4 months after that. So
now, were you guys? I'm curious because you're 38. And your conversion was just a couple of years ago. So you carried this Christian torch, a long time after this. And
right. Yeah. And when me and my wife got married, she had grown up in a family with her mom was Southern Baptist and her dad was Catholic. And so kind of a unique religious exposure she had growing up. But she's from the South. So she, was always very involved in church. And so when we got married, even though at the time that we met, we were both, certainly not living what would be called a Christian lifestyle. We, committed very early on, even before we got married, that, okay, God's going to is going to make something good of our bad decisions. And this is our testimony and how we can tell people that even though we were fallen from God, he had a better plan for us. And so it was, we had ourselves convinced that, that was what brought us all together. And I will say, I definitely lucked out in terms of who I married. I would say I won the wife lottery when it comes to that. She's been as amazing as I could expect for a spouse to be through our entire marriage. And she certainly still calls herself a Christian, but she was there for the experience. She likes music. She likes the worship. Mm-hmm. And she likes community. Yeah. But, as I've talked to her about some of my questions, like when I'm like, the Moses story could have never happened. The creation story could have never happened. She's like, oh, you really believed it did? Like she was more like, like, oh, well, why did you ever really believe that to begin with? Like so it's funny to see how, different each person, takes their journey. But so it's not as much of a challenge or roadblock for her because she's like, that stuff was never really that important to me. It was more about the experience in itself.
Yeah, let me address that. She represents the majority of the people sitting in pews today. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they are just, they love the community. They love the music. They really don't take literal very much of it. In fact, they would say if you and I, Casey, we overthink it.
Yeah. Oh, I believe me. Yep. That's been.
We take it way too serious.
Yeah. Again, I'm fortunate that with my wife, I've been able to be very transparent with her about my doubts along the way. And even though she struggled with the fact that I didn't want to continue going to church and at this point, we aren't going to church at all, and we haven't for about a year and a half. And it was important for me I just got to a point where I couldn't accept exposing my children to what they were being taught. The last time that I took them to church, they do an Awana thing.
Right.
And at the end of the season of Awana or whatever, this woman was in front of all these children, and she's like talking to between 3-year-olds and 10-year-olds. And she was saying, now kids, what are all we? And they all reply back, we're all sinners. And then she's like, and what fixes that? And they're like, the blood of Jesus. And it's like, what the fuck? Wait, like, think of how morbid that's like. In no other context would we ever be able to talk about blood and this to 3-year-olds and 10-year-olds. Like, this is not okay,
That's not okay.
But it's what's going on. This is what. And this lady said it with the sweetest, most Sunday school, preschool teacher voice that you would have thought she was saying something sweet and nice, but it was like, she was like, yeah, the blood of Jesus.
Well, you know what's worse for me than the blood of Jesus is getting a group of kids to chant together, we are sinners.
Yeah.
That pisses me off more than the whole blood metaphor thing. But anyway.
But yeah, so that was kind of the icing on the cake for me as far as, okay, I got to make a decision for the best interest of my children. And so me and my wife talked about it, and she wasn't necessarily, well, I'll be honest, we didn't completely talk about it at first. I just stopped waking us up on Sunday morning, and she was the type that would continue to sleep in if I didn't say, hey guys, time to get up and go. And, we gradually missed, and then finally I was just like, I don't think I'm going back.
Feeling pretty good on Sunday.
Yeah. And so we're still kind of at that place where we definitely don't go. But I think if you asked her today if she's a Christian, I think she would say she acknowledges or recognizes herself in that way. But, man creates God in their own image. And each individual, we talk about, there's 38,000 different denominations. I think it's even more than that. Yeah. Every person I know, every one of them comes back with, well, that God doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to believe in the real creation story to believe in Jesus. You don't have to believe in this to believe. And I'm just like, well, that's just at some point. If I don't have to believe in that, why do I have to believe that Jesus is who you say you think he is? Because each person has their own version of it.
I have been criticized for endorsing progressive Christianity. I always endorse cherry picking, which is kind of what you're talking about there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And people are like, why? Well, because guess what? I hate this phrase that conservatives use in political and religious realms, and that is, well, that's a slippery slope. But I'm going to borrow that fucking metaphor. And the reason that I endorse this stuff, and when I celebrate when somebody says, I no longer believe in a literal hell. I no longer believe in a literal Adam and Eve. Well, guess what? Guess who you're talking to? You're talking to a Christian who started with those very two things. And today I'm an atheist. So when I hear it, even though I know it's still bullshit for them to cherry pick it and hang on to little pieces of it, but that's, for one thing, they're free moral agents, and we all are, and no one should ever take that away from anybody. Right. So, number one, I don't want to dictate or even ridicule what another person believes. That's their own fucking business, especially if they don't legislate it. Number two, wink, wink, they're on their way out. So that's the reason that I'm soft on progressive Christianity, and I'm greasing the wheels of a machine that's self-destructing. It's going to collapse. Okay. Sure. So
I couldn't agree more. I tend to be a little bit harsher on them, but I've listened to nearly every one of your podcasts, and I would never be critical of your approach. I think you're right on. Really, I need to probably make it a point to take that approach more, and kind of set aside my own personal feelings because of my experience, Yeah. So
all right. So before we get into the lighthearted, easy questions, you and I shared some things on a text, and before we get into it, I just want to let you know that we don't have to do this, and we can edit all this out. But there was a season of your life where you were sexually abused from 8 years old to 10 years old,
right?
And part of the reason why earlier you started comparing and contrasting how the church kind of, what is it when somebody sets them up for, like it's a hustle?
Oh, the grooming process.
Grooming.
Yeah.
That's the word. Okay, grooming.
So the church is grooming people to get their tithe, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
And that you personally recognized a similarity between that method and that mechanism with sexual predators. And what the audience doesn't know is that you are you're privy to that information because you were the victim of such.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am more comfortable talking about that, especially, I guess, without using my my name as much, less for my own protection. But it's one of those things I've never disclosed it to my parents, more out of like I feel like I need to protect them from not wanting to feel like they they did something that they shouldn't have, or that they left me in the hands of somebody that could have done the things that they did to me, and so I for some reason, I don't know, that's always kind of been my nature to protect other people from, and I don't know why.
So it was from 8 to 10. What was how did you know the predator? I mean, how did you know?
So we lived in a neighborhood where it was, there was various ages of kids that all kind of ran around and played together. But there were a couple older kids in the neighborhood. And so my particular abuser was in his later teens. He was like 17 at the time, but he still kind of played with everybody, even though in hindsight, it's like, why was a 17-year-old playing with 8 and 9 and 10-year-old, but this older kid kind of interjected himself in the group, and he, used approaches of, hey, you're a pretty cool kid, we should hang out. And he would have me over to his house, which is only 3 houses away from mine, and just kind of initially established or built trust with me, and tried to make me think that somehow I was special. And even though I was younger, he still wanted to hang out with me because I acted cooler than a lot of the other kids, and using things that as an 8-year-old, it was very appealing, but then he started exposing me to pornography, which at that age, my parents had grown up in a pretty sheltered, naive world in rural Iowa. So they were oblivious, I think, to even the thought that there are people out there like this, you know what I mean? And so they were, the type of parents that are like, hey, go outside when the sun comes up and come home when the sun goes down, and it was, everyone kind of ran around and did their own thing each day. But yeah, ultimately, he started exposing me to pornography, and then started saying, oh, I could teach you to do things that I do with my girlfriends. And then before you know it, it was pretty intense. So I probably was abused about 100 times over the course of 2 years. And it definitely was not, I know there's some victims of sexual abuse that are like, well, it felt good at the time. Like that never felt good at any time. Like it was never at that age, like it wasn't at a point where you're really able to appreciate sexuality or understand it. And certainly not in that context, but that was something that it definitely, I don't think I didn't come to a place where I even accepted that affected me until about when I was 30 years old. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and ended up over the course of a year, I was basically spent about 120 days in the hospital having various surgeries. And so in that time, I had way more alone time with myself than I'd ever had in my life. And that was where it really kind of crept back. Like I'd never forgotten that it happened, but that was when I really had to kind of face the music, that this was still affecting me even as an adult. Like it truly impacted every relationship I had ever had in my life. I was very promiscuous throughout all my life, very, no value on sexuality or intimacy at all. Like it was all, and I bring it all back to that experience. I think that certainly had a lasting effect on how I approached sex and sexuality. But then you lump that in with how the church manipulates you into thinking that sex is such a bad thing unless it's with this one person, and so my whole perception of sex and sexuality was very distorted, I think, until really in the last several years, where I've been able to kind of separate those experiences and now kind of let go of the Christian approach to sex. And I think me and my wife are definitely in not to go into too much detail, but in a lot better place in that regard than we've ever been.
Did you ever get counseling?
Yep, I did. There was about a year after I finally did fully recover. I had from
Crohn's.
From Crohn's. It's a disease that you never fully goes away, but it's in remission. So I did finally recover from the last surgery, and after that, ended up going to counseling and just get to kind of the root of how it was impacting me still. And and there was a period of time, when you have the surgeries like I had, that I was on some pretty intense narcotic pain medications to heal the surgeries, but I was also medicating some of the emotional pain that manifested itself to be physical pain, even at that during that time of my life. So the counseling kind of helped me face a couple of those challenges that I was dealing with at that time.
Just the notion of keeping stress, like bring the stress down in your life, that could aggravate Crohn's,
Oh yeah, no, that was absolutely, that was something that I was people talked with me about quite a bit, that, getting just my emotional health was very important to my physical health in regards to, keeping the Crohn's in remission and just overall better well-being for life, for the way we live our lives. So, in terms, of emotional health and where I'm at now, that was, I'm 30, that was going on 8 years ago that we kind of faced more of those demons at that time. But again, even then, a lot of that was Christian-centered counseling or faith-based counseling. But I've been able to get to a lot better place with all those things now. I don't accept the notion that, and this is another thing that the church preaches that really kind of irks me, that the whole forgiveness, just forgive, and I think that perpetuates the abuser's ability to re-abuse, and that's why the church culture so often protects these abusers. We see it in the Catholic Church especially, but I think it's happening beyond just the Catholic Church. I think there's sexual predators that lurk in the pews of the churches and in the youth groups of these churches. There was several kids in the youth group I went to that were abused by one of the leaders there. I fortunately was not one of those victims, but I saw it firsthand. I saw this individual, the way he, manipulated these children into thinking he was someone that cared about them and got them in vulnerable situations. And the church wanted to sweep it under the rug. They didn't want to, they wanted to deal with it in-house and give the kids, spiritual counseling and convince them to forgive their abuser and turn a blind eye to it. Like that type of stuff, that's one of the most damaging things that I see out of the church.
So how do you deal with forgiveness then?
Well, I forgive those that are deserving of forgiveness. I don't feel like I owe the person who sexually abused me any ounce of forgiveness. He can fuck off, and I don't give a shit about the outcome.
That's fine.
And I'm completely at peace with that.
Yeah. Have you ever confronted him?
I haven't. I wouldn't even have a ability to connect with him. I'm sure if I search hard enough, but I really don't give a shit enough about him to want to.
If he was abusing other children in the neighborhood that time?
I don't know. I can't say whether he did or not. But I also accept to a certain extent that I know that the whole concept of hurt people, and so he probably was a victim at some point in his life, and I think that's the thing that, for me, the most important thing in my life was to make sure that I was never going to be that. I was never going to be someone that perpetuated that type of thing on anybody else in my life.
Well, you became a hurt person that doesn't hurt people.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
So I want to talk about it, because it's significant. I was looking at the timeline of your life. You got from 8 to 10, you're being abused. At 11, your parents divorce, which sounds like it was really rough. Your dad didn't want the divorce.
Nope. Yep. That was definitely a rough time.
You get a new mom. You kind of get a new stepmom. So what's your relationship with your parents now?
I think it's pretty good. My dad is one of my best friends and one of the best people I've ever known in my life. He's certainly one of those people that just sacrificed all he ever had for his family. And
does he know you're not a believer?
Yeah, we have pretty open dialogues about our conversations, and he'll send me books or links, but I'm, and I always, not always, now I've come to a place where I respond with, hey, I appreciate that you care enough about me that you feel like you want to share this with me. But I usually try to get ahead of him, and because I've read almost like I'll still listen to some Andy Stanley podcast, not because I give a shit about him, but because I know that my dad will be like, hey, did you listen to Andy Stanley's preaching on atheism? And then I'll already be able to be like, yeah, I actually already did that. Yeah. And here are the reasons that I'm not accepting his approach and why it's, I'm very fortunate that it would never impact whether they decided to love me or accept me in the family, or they would never alienate me from anyone else in the family. And don't get me wrong. Do I think they're all praying for me and wasting their breath on some of those things? They are, but that's okay. They I know it's because they care.
What about your mom?
My mom, me and her have a really good relationship now. It's not, I wouldn't call it as much a mother-son relationship as more of a friendship. And my mom they got married when she was 17 years old, and they had lived in a rural town in Iowa of 300 people, and then they moved to the great big city of Chicago. I cut her a lot of slack for some of the poor decisions she made that led to their divorce. What's the likelihood if that the one person you meet in the town of 300 people is the perfect match for you? It very likely isn't. I don't hold it against my mom. She is a great grandmother to my kids and has never not been there for me. And she wasn't equipped to be the parent that we could live with after their divorce. And that was the right decision too. My dad was certainly far more emotionally healthy and stable person.
So are your siblings religious?
Yeah, my biological brother is, me and him are pretty much on the same page. He's not a believer and hasn't been for some time. Mm-hmm. But he never was open about it until I told him, like, hey, dude, this is bullshit. And he goes, oh, I've known it was bullshit for a long time, But and my step siblings, to me, we've always kind of acknowledged each other as brothers and sisters. We've never really said step, it was, we were all one family, And so my sister is certainly a Christian, and her husband is actually a pastor of a mega church. And so I'll leave their names in that church out of.
Sure.
But how have they reacted to your deconversion?
I mean, no one's happy about it, at the end of the day, but there hasn't been a whole lot of backlash, like as far as, and again, I don't know what they're saying when I'm not there, I think there was some initial shock because I'm the type of person, when I believe something, like I tell people that, when I was a Christian, I didn't have any shame in talking to other people about it. I would bring it up if we were at a dinner party or at a bar with friends. Like I believed it, and it was something I genuinely, so I would talk about. Well, that's still part of my personality. It's just the belief is different, and I'm just as vocal about it. And because there has been a couple conversations where my wife's like, well, why do we have to talk? Like, do you have to bring it up? And I'm like, hey, no, that was the same personality that, that traits that I used when I evangelized to people. The difference is, I'm open about my beliefs regardless of which side of the line my beliefs fall on. And
right. Yeah, I get that.
Well, I've often said on the show before that we personally, that those of us that have deconverted, everything has changed and nothing has changed. So you're still the same guy. Now I want to go back to your, you kind of kept this sexual abuse you swept it under the rug. It was, you just didn't talk about it with anybody. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, at what age and to whom did you first tell somebody?
The first person that I ever told was actually my brother-in-law, the one who's the pastor.
Well, you're laying there in the hospital bed, and that's when it all resurfaced, and that's when you said, I gotta deal with this.
But I didn't even, I still went probably 9 months of still just dealing with, but I medicated it. Because of the recovery of the surgeries, I was on high doses of every type of medication that makes you feel amazing, right? So I used those as ways to heal my physical and emotional pain that I was facing and then, as I kind of faced that demon, as I realized, okay, I'm healed from the Crohn's, I can't justify continuing to use the narcotic pain medication. So I reached out to my brother-in-law, and me and him had a couple hour conversation, and he was very non-judgmental, which of course I wouldn't expect him to be judgmental. I was a victim, but he was a great person to be there for me at that time. And then he did help connect me with some counseling, though again, that was all church-based and faith-based counseling, but it still was, it allowed me to kind of come to terms with a lot of those things and really just talk out loud about them, because I had literally never talked about it. It was one of those things that, and I had convinced myself that it had no impact on me, something that happened, I'm over it. And I don't even know if I even acknowledged it as being sexual abuse even in my own head. And until you're laying in a hospital bed with 20 hours of free time on your hand every day, except for the 4 hours you happen to fall asleep before they come in and take your blood again or do whatever they're doing again, you're faced with more thoughts, probably a lifetime worth of thoughts were packed into those 120 or so days that I spent in the hospital during that time frame. So, I did about a year's worth of pretty intense counseling. Yeah, to kind of help put it behind me. And
that was about 8 years ago?
That was about 8 years ago.
And what point did you tell your wife?
I told her shortly after I told my brother-in-law, and that is still it's one of those topics that I'm not, and the fact that I'm talking about it out loud with you guys is not something that I do on a regular basis, but I'm usually more comfortable putting it in writing. There's still a certain amount of, I don't know if shame's the right word, but embarrassment, I guess, is the word, that comes when you talk about something like that. So I've been very transparent with her typically in emails, but I've been guarded in my verbal conversations, and I think maybe that's a natural thing that it's a little easier to put a thought out into an email or a letter that you can not have to look the person in the eyes. And more than anything, I know it would break her heart, when I'm talking to her about it, and she would cry and then I would cry and we'd both be a mess, so
you don't open that can of worms.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think Bob's right that Crohn's, and it's nobody's ever going to know for sure.
Right.
But
it's having mysterious disease. Having
stuffed that from age 10 to, age 30, that's 20 years of you carrying around a big, deep, dark secret.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that festers under the surface, and
it could have something to do with it.
I think it might have contributed to your Crohn's, but eventually, just sitting there, like you said, for 20 hours at a time, it's coming up.
Yeah.
There's no way to run from it. That's definitely when you're faced with and that was, in hindsight, what I did was all through my teens and early 20s. I lived 7-day-a-week social life where I never had to be alone with my own thoughts.
There you go.
But I do know that it did affect every relationship that I ever had, as far as intimate relationship. I was not a very good partner or boyfriend to anybody that I dated until my wife, and even the first couple of years that me and my wife dated, it probably wasn't until that I faced all these things that I was able to kind of just let my guard down completely and trust the other person and get to that place. But I never was connecting the dots that those things were what was behind that. But I was a very untrusting person, and but now I've got to a place where me and my wife are at the best place that we've ever been, and she's probably the best human being I've ever known too. So that's a big part of it. So
what do you guys do for fun?
With 3 boys that are all in different activities, that
you have
is,
no
the
life.
kids are kind of the thing that we have most fun, spending time at their sporting events and things like that. I'm a huge fantasy baseball fan, or I'm a huge baseball fan in general, and a huge Cubs fan. So right now, this is
is big for you.
This is big. Last night's game, I was jumping up and down. But yeah, fantasy baseball is something that me and that group of friends I've had since 1st and 2nd grade. We all do a fantasy baseball league that we've done this is our 18th year, and we'll go to Vegas for the draft, or next year we're going to Florida for the draft. But just, more than anything, me and my wife enjoy spending time together, watching movies or TV shows or sporting events. And then other than that, primarily spending time with our boys that certainly keep us pretty busy right now. They're 5, 7, and 11. So there's not a whole lot of downtime.
Well, hearing about that group of guys that you've been friends with, that's, for one thing, that's really rare.
Yeah.
To keep, everybody loses those friends, but for you guys to remain friends, and especially even after moving, I guess you're talking about long distance friendships in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, several of us have moved. One lives in Florida, Seattle. Okay. But we all lived in Illinois originally. Several of them still do, and early on, and one of my best friends. And I don't know where he got this wisdom, but early on, we were probably 14, and we had been friends for a long time. But he said, he's like, good friendships take effort. And he doesn't even remember telling me this. That's the best part. Like, I tell him that he told me this. He's like, I never said that shit. Like, you never, I'm like, but at an early age, I got that advice, and I was like, that's true. Like, the friendships don't just sustain themselves or maintain. You have to invest time and make the conscious effort to pick up the phone to call people, and make sure that you celebrate people's successes. If one of my friends, they love calling me to tell me good news, because they say, hey, I bought a new house. I don't go, oh man, I wish I bought a new house. Like, I get excited for that because I genuinely am excited for them. I love them.
Well, Casey, I want to just say, number one, I was just about to say what a great group you've got a community of long-distance friendships in those guys, and you've been out of church for a year and a half, and you guys are managing. It sounds like you and your wife are working through your religious differences really well.
Right.
And you're probably, we didn't delve into it, but you sound like that you're able to meet in the middle as far as how do we want to raise our boys? Mm-hmm. How are we going to teach them morals outside the church? Those kind of questions.
Yep. Yeah. No. And I still think there's, more conversations to be had. I don't know that she's completely content with saying that she'll never go to church again. We may still have to have future discussions about, but I think she's open to whether that would be a more liberal church that is less hell and more love, and, no blood talk or whatever, So if we have to go down that path again, I would be open to, some compromising if she felt like that was important to her. And we're really fortunate too, where we moved into a community here in Michigan that we live in a cul-de-sac of 8 homes where there's 24 children in between the 8 homes, all between the same ages of our children. They're all in the same stage of life that we're at. And none of them are believers. So it's just genuine friendships.
Dude, that's a jackpot right there.
We really, we hear that quite a bit, how fortunate we are that we landed in the neighborhood that we did. And we do feel very grateful that we built the friendships that we have there. So I kind of have the best of both worlds. I have my long-term friends that know me better than anybody in my life, and I can talk to about anything. And then I have a good group of local friends that we can stand in the driveway and drink beers while our kids ride their bikes around the cul-de-sac. So
yeah, sounds good. The beer party.
It really is a good life, and I'm working for a phenomenal organization that just takes amazing care of me, and that really obviously means a lot to have if you can enjoy your work and enjoy what you do each day, it certainly adds to a better overall well-being, for everything. Yeah.
So the snapshot that we have, we're catching a stranger here.
Yeah.
At 38, and we can go back and rewind and watch the movie of what brought you to this place. But the guy we're talking to today,
Right.
I guess all I'm just saying is that it sounds good. Your deconversion was relatively painless.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I would say it from the horror stories that I've heard from other people and seeing some of the other stories that people have shared on the Facebook page that you created. I mean, some of those things really break my heart when I see
Absolutely.
what people have to face, and I can't even wrap my mind around how people that love somebody could do the things that I hear about people doing. And I have been very fortunate.
I would think that the pastor of the church, the big mega church, would go, "Boy, we lost some money here." They'd be very upset that you left. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm
trying to
sure
keep you.
he misses that. We have maintained a friendship. We go to lunch about once a month still. And we have pretty open dialogues about. I mean, he certainly knows where I'm at, but he does make me pick up the bill most of the time. So I don't know.
Wait a second. Wait. You have lunch with your pastor, your former pastor. Why? Is it his idea or yours?
Yeah, I mean, we became friends.
Are you about
We're
the same age? Yeah.
Similar ages, and yeah, I still care about him as a person. I don't know if that's just my nature.
Do you get any indication that he's on his way, that he's curious about your journey?
I can tell you that, I mean, he probably wouldn't be willing to acknowledge it out loud, but he has opened up to me about his views, which are a lot more liberal than you would expect from a pastor.
Or that he can let on from the pulpit.
Yeah, and so and one of the things that is, I mean, for the first year and a half I lived here, I mean, I was his accountability partner. He was who. He's been, so a part of it for him might be, hey, I've been pretty open with this guy about a lot of my doubts and a lot of
all my skeletons.
But he is one of those examples of someone that he's a lifer in the church. He was born and raised in ministry, and his version of God is certainly less harmful than what we see in a lot of other places.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he's going to listen to this?
Yeah, pass this on to him.
We'll
I'm
see.
thinking about how much I'm going to leave in. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine a context in which he would. I think obviously if I was using my name, then he would, but I think that. Wow. Yeah, I think. I don't think he will.
We're just thinking maybe he'd like to come on eventually.
Oh no, I don't care about having him on.
Oh,
if he deconverts, yeah.
Yeah. If that were to happen, I'm sure he would broach the topic, but I don't know that.
He's there.
I think he likes his liberal, like one foot in, 1 foot out.
But he's secretly jealous of you. That's the story I'm going to stick with.
I think there's a certain amount of. I've talked to several of my Christian friends that are more liberal in their beliefs that I feel like are slightly envious that they haven't had the strength to speak up about or truly question themselves. They haven't allowed themselves to go down that rabbit hole of really searching and seeking out the truth of what they believe. And they know if they did, that they would find out that it's all bullshit.
Right.
And so
that's what they fear most.
Yeah. Their fear is probably right, because if they go down that rabbit hole, they will change their mind. Mean, I can't see how any rational human being can truly look at the facts and walk away and still come out on the other side of it and say that they believe everything they believe to be true. Is it Mike Mahargue, Science Mike?
Yep.
His approach of Christianity is at least the most honest one that I've heard. So like he's acknowledges his cognitive dissonance. I still think he's wrong, completely, but he's been, the most honest as far as I can see from an outspoken Christian as far as his approach.
Well, listen, Casey, I know this was hard, and you, like you said, you've never told it in such a public forum as this, and so I appreciate your courage to do this, and thanks for coming on.
I really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me.
Casey from Michigan.
Yeah, Casey, who loves the Cubs, and the Cubs are doing great.
You know, his anonymity, it turns out as we're listening, his dad knows, his mom knows, his siblings know. Mm-hmm. I think it was because of the sexual abuse.
Maybe.
Yeah, just the nature of
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you know, when you're 8 or 9 years old and something like that happens, that's pretty tough stuff. So, yeah,
well,
could be.
Yeah, and he did say, you know, the reason I don't talk about it is I'm embarrassed by it. And so that's it.
Right.
That's
and yet
the
he's the victim. What's to be embarrassed about? It was done to him. He didn't. But still, it's, you know, it's a hard thing. And the thing about $125,000 giving over the course of, you know,
10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. My gosh. That I could use that money. And that's what he said too.
You know, a lot of times you say, what were the issues that really made you, you know, toppled your faith? And he said hell and tithing.
Right.
So the way church handles money and the way they handle the eternal torture of souls.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, one thing that came up, we were talking about Pat Robertson. You were talking about the place where he raised all that money. And then Casey made a point to talk about the fear, or at least, you know, get people into a place where they feel like they need the protection of the church. Like the pastor's going to do that. The pastor's going to say, you need to be here every Sunday. Mm-hmm. That's their mantra, you know. Right. And we know that that's dualistic. Like we know that his paycheck depends on that. But secondly, he has convinced himself that he's doing these people and he's enhancing their lives by coming. This is what I'm saying as far as like trying to answer the question, are these people malicious?
Right.
Or are they just duped? Well, they're both. Mm-hmm. They're both. I mean, to whatever spectrum degree, 60-30 or 60-40, 70-30. Mm-hmm. And but a friend of mine personally knew some of the ins and outs and the runnings of the 700 Club, Pat Robertson.
Oh, right.
And literally, when they need a good thrust of fundraising, they go on and scare the shit out of their listeners. The gays are coming. Oh. Obama's going to declare martial law. Jesus is coming back soon. Right. And we need to get more people saved before then. Or God is waiting on the Jews to repent. And so we've got people going over there to Israel, evangelizing those people. And when X amount of Jews gets, I mean, all kinds of stories, then that's going to be the release. That's what God's waiting on to return, to part the clouds and blow the trumpet and come back. So whatever narrative that creates, oh my God, I got to write a check. It's absolutely the method. It's almost formulaic.
Right.
It
Push
works.
the button. Yeah, exactly.
It absolutely works. They know what they're doing. You know, I think about that with a lot of people. The smartest people in the world are these people that have really learned how to push the buttons of human beings. Mm-hmm. And I think of Ann Coulter. I think of Rush Limbaugh. These shock jocks and these absolutely know exactly what they're doing. And in some ways, their genius... I even think that there might even be at this late in the game. I think there might even be a genius behind Trump. That let's say that Trump really wanted to pop the zit of American culture. Okay. Like under the surface, there's all this pus, and that's the racism and the bigotry and the xenophobia, and I want to bring that out into the
daylight.
The daylight.
Right.
Some of the shit that he says, not just the stuff we caught him saying 10 years ago this week, but the stuff he says
right now,
from pulpits, not caught on hidden mic. He knows exactly he's standing in. He knows exactly. This last week he said, I don't care if you're on a deathbed and about to die, get out and vote for me.
Right.
I mean, it was one of the least empathic statements I ever I think a presidential candidate has ever said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he either literally has no core.
Yeah.
Or, well, even when he said, I could walk up to somebody on the street and shoot him and you'd still vote for me.
Right.
That smacks of, I am pushing the envelope as far as I can and showing you, everybody, like America's having to look in the mirror.
Wow. I see what you mean.
And if he literally wanted to pop the zit of American disgust, the lower angels of our nature, then he has done it. And he's done it brilliantly. Anyway, I'm getting back to the people from Pat Robertson to Ann Coulter to Rush Limbaugh,
all those guys,
to all the guys on Fox. They know exactly how to toy with what is the most robotic about the human mind. Because there's a lot of creativity in the human mind. There's a lot of uniqueness and stuff. But really, there's some 1 + 1 = 2 when it comes to the human mind and the human interaction with society. And they have completely exploited it and laughed all the way to the bank. Guarantee it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
the first contract that really kind of elevated Rush Limbaugh was a $36 million contract. I don't know if it was a 5-year or 10-year or whatever, but either way,
Yeah.
they have basically said, we are willing to give you $36,000 if you'll keep, $36 million if you'll do this, if you'll keep this audience riled up. And honestly, I don't relate to that.
Yeah, me either.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't be that smart. No, I'm not kidding. I couldn't get on the air day after day and continue to know what to say to manipulate people and keep them thinking that you're genuine.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's a skill and a half. I don't have it. I don't have that. I can't do it.
Yeah. Me either.
And I'm not trying to say I'm better than that, but I am saying that I'm not that good a liar. You have to be a really tremendous actor.
Yeah.
You're Robert De Niro. If you're pulling, I mean, seriously, that's what I
to
think.
pull that off. Yeah,
All right, that was a long, empty rant. I may take that out.
Okay. But it was good to have Casey on anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we'll do another one. What do you think?
Now, you're sounding tired in that. Because we just did a 2-hour conversation with Casey, and we are tired.
We are. There was a lot of stuff to listen to. Interesting stuff.
Well, I don't mind saying it, that I think when he said there at the end, I don't get to talk about this much, well, in some ways, those are 2 different examples of it in his life where he keeps stuff down until it's a volcano. So the volcano of his sexual abuse erupted after 20 years of capping it off.
Right.
And sealing it off. Well, here he is. This is the first time he's really talked openly about his ex journey, his ex-Christian journey, and his abuse. And I think we just kind of, we just experienced a fire hydrant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
I mean, I'm a talker. And I'm one of those guys that chain links or like train car, when you conjunction, junction, what's your function?
Everybody.
You take 18 sentences and you conjunct them into one long stream of consciousness. I do that all the time. But he just bettered me. I got to look in the mirror for a second. I thought, wow, is that how I sound? That was a bit much. And people won't know it in the edit. Like what we just played for people is they're like, what are you talking about? Well, but the raw,
right?
The raw was a lot, and I had to edit a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
But he's got a great heart, and I loved his. I mean, it was maybe the first time I ever heard anybody say, "Yeah, my predator, fuck him." I don't owe him any forgiveness, and I don't believe this stuff about forgiveness. In fact, I think that empowers him to keep abusing me. So fuck him. And I was like, well, have you ever contacted him? Nope, don't want to.
Right.
I don't give a damn what he's doing. I think that shows a lack of bitterness. Because this soft guy that wants to go reconcile, he's going to want to look him up. This angry guy that wants to go kill him, he's going to want to look him up. Well, here's Casey right in the middle. I don't care either way. I don't want to kill him, and I don't want to reconcile.
Right.
He doesn't exist to me, and I've moved on. And that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. I think that's probably the healthiest way to go, too, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, excellent. Thanks. Thanks, Cass.
Talk to you later.
Yeah.
So I'm here with Brenda Quinn, former guest of the show, episode 77, and licensed, what are you, psychologist?
I am a psychologist.
Cool. But you don't hang a shingle, or at least you're busy enough to where you're not necessarily looking for new business. I was going to plug your business in case Middle Tennesseans needed a therapist, but you're busy.
Well, I am busy, but if somebody calls and says I'm really looking for a secular therapist, if I can't fit you in, I'll help you find somebody.
Yeah.
I'll make that offer.
But so we don't have Yellow Pages anymore, so you're on the web.
I'm on the web.
Brenda Quinn.
BrendaQuinn.com.
Really?
Yes, BrendaQuinn.com.
Cool. So you've listened to Casey's episode.
Yes.
You know, as a professional, what's some of your thoughts about what was brought up in Casey's story?
Oh, I thought he made a lot of really, really interesting points. And the one that really struck me was the one where he said something like he ended up medicating emotional pain that became physical pain.
So he's in the hospital for Crohn's. He's
Yes.
had surgeries so that he has scars. He has cuts. He has stitches. And they've given him morphine or something, some kind of opiate, to ease the physical pain of his surgeries. But at the same time, because of the 120 days in the hospital and 20 hours a day, he was forced to reconcile with this 20-year-old secret of his sexual abuse from ages 8 to 10, and now he's 30. He's in the hospital. Eventually, he says, my scars and my stitches were healed, and yet I was still taking the opiates. And I realized it was for not only emotional pain, but like you're pointing out, and I didn't catch it the first time. But listening closer, he says, my emotional pain actually manifested as physical pain.
Yes.
And what is that?
It's fascinating, first of all. It really seems like the human mind that we are capable of, for some of us, of doing what we call somaticizing. Somaticizing,
Semantics.
Right? Yes. Well, no, more soma, body.
Oh, soma.
Somaticizing, right? So the idea is that our emotional pain becomes expressed as physical pain. So, for example, in 4th grade, I spent 1 day a week throwing up and going home.
And this is your personal
This
story.
is me, 4th grade. And I wasn't faking. I was throwing up.
And you hadn't
But
eaten
it was because,
food poisoning or anything?
No, once a week. About.
Yeah.
And it was because of stress. It was because my parents were fighting and I wanted to be home. And as a 4th grade kid, my body decided, be sick, throw up.
This is when therapists or doctors sometimes say, listen to your body.
Yes.
It's not always just a physical ailment. There's actually stress, or you're distraught or you're upset, and it's manifesting in your physiology.
Right. So now as a psychologist, I've worked with people who have had what they thought was paralysis.
Like they can't move a limb?
They can't move. They cannot move. And it's not just. It is emotional pain. Like my favorite client, this is way back in another city, so she's not going to recognize herself, was a woman whose husband had had a stroke. And she woke up one morning in the hospital and she couldn't walk, but she could control her bladder. But she wasn't faking. So they take her for tests, but the doctors know if you can't walk, you also can't control your bladder. So They knew it was what we call conversion disorder, which is converting some emotional distress into a physical problem.
So a layperson like me, a dumbass like me, might say, it's all in her head.
Yes, it is, but everything is in our head, right?
Yeah.
Pain is in our head, joy is in our head, sex is in our head, everything's in our head.
Yeah.
So, but literally she had no spinal cord injury, but her brain told her, no, don't walk. You're paralyzed, because she was terrified because she couldn't take her husband home and she didn't want to put him in a nursing home. So all it took was the physical therapist telling her, oh, you're weak, you need to regain your strength, we'll practice walking, and me talking to her about how it was okay that she didn't take her husband home, that nobody could. I've had clients who have seizures, but they're not real seizures. They're pseudo seizures.
Wow.
So when you put an EKG, it's not a seizure. But it feels like a seizure. It looks like a seizure, but it's emotional pain. When we work on their anxiety, that goes away.
Wow. So we're complicated creatures.
Oh, so complicated.
Yeah. All right. So Casey got Crohn's.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about Crohn's. I don't really know what it is.
Crohn's is a disorder of the small intestine in which there's inflammation, and sometimes even sections of the small intestine have to be removed, which I'm guessing is the case with him when he
'Cause he
talked
had
about
surgeries.
surgery,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Most people are treated just with medications. Changes in diet are often important, and reduction in stress.
He's the third guest on the show within the last few months whose anxiety manifested in their bowels.
Well, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
And here's why.
This is what you call anal retentive, or no?
Stop at the Freud already.
All right. I'm good. Yeah.
No, maybe he was onto something, right? You know how we say, oh, I felt it in my gut? Well, there's new research coming out that says there's actually more neurotransmitters in our gut than in our brains. So maybe our gut, literally our small intestine and large intestine, are more involved in emotion than we think.
And they're trying to tell us something.
Yes, exactly. And then number 2 is, okay, stress, especially anxiety, right? We have a fight or flight response. Part of the fight or flight response is blood being shunted to our muscles and away from our gut. Digestion stops or slows down because an animal, imagine that we're an antelope, we don't need to digest. We don't need to eat.
Right now we need to run.
We need to run, right?
So the blood's going to go to our legs.
Yes. Yeah. So somebody with anxiety, their body is constantly in that fight or flight or halfway to a fight or flight response. So it affects your digestion.
That's
a
interesting.
lot of anxiety is around the gut. So I've had people who have have agoraphobia, don't leave their homes because they're afraid they're going to have a bowel accident.
That was actually one of our guests. That's Mark Stevens. He shared that.
That makes perfect sense.
Agoraphobia.
The
fear to leave the house? Or
fear
what?
of leaving the house.
Okay.
Fear of the marketplace, technically, but linguistically, but it's, people who end up getting stuck in their homes because they're afraid they'll have panic attacks
What about
if they
Bob?
leave their homes.
Did you see What About Bob?
I did many years ago.
But he was afraid to leave the house at the first of the movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I forgot.
But it was kind of germ phobia thing. You know?
Oh, gotcha. No.
Touching the doorknob.
True agoraphobia is much more about a fear of having a panic attack, right? So anyway, Crohn's, it makes sense that our digestion, if our bowels are slowed down or stopped, that stress is going to be bad for Crohn's disease.
Okay, you and I,
all gut disorders.
You and I, neither of us know Casey. We've never met him.
Correct.
I just had him on the show as a stranger, really. And a lot of our guests are such. Would you say that people that get Crohn's are stereotypically or typically anxious people? Like, I mean, how much do we know about what causes it or what, like Bob said, aggravates it?
Exacerbates is the word I would use.
Okay.
It looks like Crohn tends to be genetic. It tends to run in
genetic.
families. Yes.
Okay.
Does tend to run in families. So probably you have to have the
gene.
Crohn's, gene, and stress then makes it worse.
Okay, so somebody could have like a dormant Crohn's gene because they're just not anxious or there's nothing in their life that sparks it to life. But in his case, he had some things that made him an anxious person or at least a stressed out person. So I think suppressing the sexual abuse that he received as a child might have, but like you're saying, I think you and I talked before the taping, was you can't prove that. There's no evidence for that.
Right. And it is also true, though, that people with Crohn's they are more at risk for anxiety and depression after they develop Crohn's. We don't know about before because as far as I know, there's no prospective studies, but it does make sense that having a gut disorder that causes you pain and sometimes you got to go like right now. And so there are bowel accidents and all sorts of problems with Crohn's. Well, it's hard to hold down a job if one day a week or one day every couple of weeks you're out because of pain. So it makes sense that Crohn's causes stress, but also that stress exacerbates the symptoms.
Yeah, because if you're, let's say you're going to work and you have this a little bit of agoraphobia, or you have issues with going to the bathroom in public or at your workplace, and you're anxious about going to work. And like, I leave for work every day and I have an hour and a half commute, and I leave at 6:30. And if I don't have a bowel movement before I leave and I get stuck in traffic, this very day when I drove to work, I had to pull over at a truck stop on my way to work because, I mean, it was urgent, but I also don't want, because I've had hemorrhoids.
Oh,
Jesus.
Nothing is sacred.
Yeah.
Nothing is sacred on this show.
but pressure can cause hemorrhoids.
Of course.
And so if I'm squeezing my sphincter the whole way to work, then I think that's
not good.
right. So all I'm saying is, when you said stress compiles itself, and like it's almost exponential, like you're anxious
It's
about being anxious.
self-perpetuating.
Yeah, we used to say you're having a problem with having a problem.
Uh-huh.
Right. So he gets Crohn's, he deals with this stuff. We've talked about the pain and how he medicated that, and how emotional trauma can manifest as physical pain.
Emotional pain of any sort, including trauma, can manifest as physical pain. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know if this is psychological or not, but what do you think about his theory on forgiveness? Like, where he said, I don't have to forgive him.
You know,
Go ahead.
I think for true healing, the person we have to forgive is ourselves.
For letting it happen? What do you say to yourself?
Yeah. People who are abused almost always blame themselves. They almost
It's pretty common.
always.
Rape victims, or
Even
they feel
when
dirty.
they were infants when it happened,
Helpless.
they blame themselves. Right? It's so universal.
So it could affect his self-image.
Absolutely.
Growing
so, right. The church says, forgive your abuser. I say, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for the abuse. Forgive yourself for being a human being and all the mistakes all of us make. I'm big into forgiving ourselves.
And forgiving, I don't know if this is weird or not, but forgiving the circumstances, because you could find yourself, like, life handed you a bad deck of cards early on, and you could resent your own existence for the rest of your life. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud forgive that it ever happened. Forgive yourself, but there's almost like a blame game going on there, and I don't like blame games. But there's just like, forgive the universe. I know that sounds...
I say it all the time,
Yeah.
the universe, right?
Yeah.
Because, it's not like forgive God. Forgive the universe. Forgive circumstances.
Yeah.
That, you ended up with a shitty mom. You ended up
Or this
falling
shitty neighbor
into
kid that
right,
forced
sexual
him-
predator's
Yeah.
net.
So overall, I mean, I don't know. What's your takeaway from, like, if you had Casey in a couch across from you, what would you say, or what would you prescribe? I don't know. Do you prescribe medicine?
Nope.
Okay.
No, psychologists, we're talk
That's a
therapists.
psychiatrist.
Psychiatrists prescribe meds. I don't know, because he seems like he's in a good place.
He's leveled off. I mean, it's 8 years ago that he kind of went through it
Right. He sounded like he was in a pretty good place. One thing I would say is that he talked about being promiscuous and after the sexual abuse and having a distorted
Yeah, I think through high
sense
school
of
and college.
sexuality. Totally understandable.
Yeah.
Right? With sexual abuse, people often go the one way or the other. It's either no sex or lots of sex.
all. Yeah. And,
Right? Because
and just
of that
kind of
distorted.
calloused about it, like apathetic about who I fuck and when I fuck. And
Yeah.
it's just like throw caution to the wind, or I don't know, just...
Right, because you've been taught through that abuse that sex is meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sex is not a loving act,
Yeah.
right? So how is it going to be a loving act for you? It's not a loving act.
It's not reserved for intimacy.
It's not. It's not about intimacy at all, right? And so for he and his wife to have worked on this, and
Yeah.
then the distorted view of sex with the church, I mean, that's just fascinating to me.
Yeah,
The
that he
fact,
came through
I've
that.
seen a couple of shows, like reality shows, where the father talks to the young daughters and has the purity ring and so concerned with her virginity.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems so frickin' creepy to me.
Yeah.
It is hard for me to wrap my brain around that. It just seems so unhealthy.
So what I hear is, in these two polls, is the abuse that Casey underwent was, this is meaningless, and it's not fun, because he didn't enjoy it. It's just not. It's not
being used.
Yeah, it's ugly. The ultra-conservative Christian insanity over the sacredness of it is like the opposite pole.
Yes.
And it's the just like all things, moderation.
That beautiful middle.
It's somewhere in the middle as far as it's just sex is one way, but it's sex. It's powerful. It's a way, like in my 30-year marriage, I've been amazed throughout the years that if we've gone a week or something without having sex, and we can find ourselves like disconnecting through dialogue. Like I can feel us moving apart, and sex kind of recalibrates our marriage. Even though it's just a physical act that dogs do, like there's something that happens to where, oh yeah, this is my soulmate, and we kind of realign, and we're good for another week. I mean, I'm 50. You know, we don't fuck like rabbits like we used to.
Again, nothing is sacred.
Nothing's sacred.
Does your poor wife listen to this show?
Yes, she does. I might have to take that out, though. We'll see. Well, thanks, Brenda, for sharing your expertise.
You're welcome. I was happy to do it.
So that's our show. My thanks to Casey for bravely sharing his story. To Bob, as always, for being my dear friend and co-host, and to Brenda Quinn, whose website again is brendaquinn.com. That's Brenda with a Y. Next week, I interview a local pastor who is openly gay and a super sweetheart of a human being. You're going to love him. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.